Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. I don't know if this is going to fire up. This is just really important just because it says my name up here the whole time. I would like to thank everyone for being here. I know most of the people in the room. I've got clients that drove down from West Palm Beach to be here. Thank you, Rick and Maggie Pamplin. I've got friends that have a product that's in development and has gone to market. There's a lot of lawyers in the room. They're here just to correct me, I'm sure, and tell everyone what I messed up afterwards. Insurance agents, PR company. So fun mix in the room, and I just really appreciate everyone being here. But hopefully you came with some questions. I have there's a handout for everyone with some info. I may or may not cover everything because after a few minutes I would like to take questions and make this interactive, because maybe there's something that would be beneficial that's not on here that you have a question, and then we can give you some value today. Or if you meet someone in the room you can do business with, then that's even better. That would make me feel good, even if it has nothing to do with me. I'm a big believer in connections, and inevitably I end up just talking about business. Intertwines with the law, but business. I went into business law and business litigation because I come from a family of small business owners. My grandfather on my father's side, so Trembly, after the war, he went to watchmaking school and moved from Kansas to the middle of New Mexico near Albuquerque. So kind of talk about the desert, right? Where is that and who's from there? So there's a spot along the railroad after the war, and the railroad was all managed by pocket watches. Today it's all digital, but imagine back then, when's the next train coming in? Every single railroader had a pocket watch that had to be pristine and working all the time, so weekly they had to get their pocket watches cleaned and wound and that sort of thing. So moves the family across the country with not a lot of money because he's going to purchase someone's jewelry store. When he gets to town, off the train, the guy says, "I changed my mind." He reneged. So of course there was no contract in place back then. Talk about a hardship for a family. Had to roll up his sleeves and start on his own. And I think that plays a lot into why I enjoy helping business owners avoid getting into situations which, as I say, getting legally screwed. If you have your contracts in place beforehand, at least in this country, you do have redress through the court system. So you don't end up saying, well, I just lost a lot of money and there's nothing I can do about it. Let's go to court. But even better than that is staying out of court. And that's why I love working with business owners, people like you, to help you develop your contracts ahead of time, because a lot of people, it's still a handshake economy. So some buddies get together, start a business, don't put anything in writing. Next thing you know, one person thinks he owns 80% because he spent 80% of the time working on the business. Well, that's not how it works if it's not in writing. So that leads me into my first sort of question. What do you think is the biggest source of disputes that a business has to face? Someone says, why do most people get sued, or why do most people end up in court? What would immediately come to your mind? Mark.
Breach of contract.
Okay. What kind of breach of contract?
Just one party not fulfilling an obligation that at least the other party believes they were supposed to.
Okay. You're talking business provides a service and then doesn't get paid for that service, for example. Very common situation. Breach of contract, right? Nothing sexy about it, but that's the way it goes, okay? That's what most people say, but the number one source of business problems that it's going to basically cause you to go under early on for small businesses is internal disputes with your business partner or partners, or if you're an LLC, the other members of the business. At least 3 times per month we get a referral or someone that finds our office because they're having a dispute with a business partner and they don't know what to do. My first question is, do you have an operating agreement? Unfortunately, 80% of the time they say no. You go into business and you put your money into it and your time and your effort, and you never put in writing who owned what. So we're going to get into what you should have in an operating agreement later, but I always start with, you better have one. You've got to have one. And I've made this mistake in the past when I was younger, and a lot of people do. Maybe some of you are going, oh crap, I better go look at my operating agreement, but that's okay. You've got to protect yourself, because if you go into business, Joe and I went to law school together, right? So let's say Joe and I start a t-shirt business. We don't put anything in writing. I don't do a thing. I give Joe some money and Joe works his butt off for 3 years. Joe's not going to feel like I deserve 50% of the company because I didn't do a thing. I didn't lift a finger. Well, guess what? I put in my capital contribution, and unless we have in writing that whoever works the most gets a certain percentage of the business, Joe and I have 50-50. And that's what a lot of people end up dealing with. So, and I'm really, that is geared towards small business owners. I know we have a lot of small, meaning 50 employees or less, usually 10 to 15 million in revenue or less. You know, your large corporations, they know these things. They've got internal, they've got lawyers on staff, or they already have, you know, one of the downtown firms on retainer. That's good for them, you know. Before you download anything from Apple, you click 3 times, I agree to the terms of service. Who do you think is working on those voluminous documents that you're clicking agree without reading, right? For small business owners, they need resources to help level the legal playing field and keep themselves out of trouble. So that's my first spiel on operating agreements. Do we have any CPAs in the room? Okay, who knows what an S Corp is? I get into a discussion every few months with a CPA, and I say discussion, but it's more of an argument. What is an S Corp?
You earn the money, or the money goes to the corporation, and then the corporation pays withdraw to the corporation.
Okay, that's pretty good. You already know more than most CPAs. I say that there's so many good CPAs that I work with, but we still get into this argument all the time. Well, okay, what kind of business structure do you have? Oh, I'm an S Corp. An S Corp doesn't exist, okay? A legal entity, you're either an LLC, a partnership, or a corporation. You can choose to be taxed by the IRS as an S Corp if you are even an LLC, or if your corporation has 50 shareholders or less. It's just a tax designation, it's not a legal entity. So nobody flunked that one, that's a good thing. But those two things, when entrepreneurs or people starting up call me, those are the two main things that I go over with them. How to incorporate, which is easy. I mean, you can really do that online yourself. You just have to select the right thing. Usually you're an LLC, and then you elect to be taxed as an S Corp. That's going to provide you the most tax benefits and the most legal protection as you're setting up your business. So,
if you're small, right? I mean, there's a reason to be a regular S Corp as opposed to S Corp for tax purposes.
well, yes, if you have more than 50 shareholders, you no longer can elect to be an S Corp. But S Corp means if you're a C Corp, the business pays taxes, and then the business pays its employees, and the employees and shareholders pay taxes, so it's double taxation. So if you can stay small enough to be taxed as an S Corp, there's a huge benefit. It's flow-through taxation, as Ms. Bliss mentioned earlier. So a lot of benefits there.
Where does the LLC play into that? Like, or LLP or LLC?
Right, you can still elect to be taxed as an S Corp, even though you're an LLC or a limited liability partnership. That's where I get in arguments with CPAs, because they'll say, oh, well, we can't elect S Corp, you know, it has to be a sole proprietor. And no, you can be taxed as an S Corp even if you're an LLC. I don't know.
What's the difference really? I know legally there's a difference, obviously, but for like why would I define myself as an LLC as opposed to a sole proprietorship?
More legal protection. So with an LLC, I mean, really, the name is limited liability company. If you set it up properly, then if your business goes under and you haven't signed any personal guarantees, but you owe people money, when you go out of business, then they're not going to be able to come after George personally. They can't go after you, your house, your wife, your cars. That's why you separate you from your entity. You own the entity and you're running the entity, but it's separate. So if you have separate books and you're not commingling funds, and if you didn't set up an LLC just to kind of screw people, right? And you say, well, this is through my LLC, but it's really you. As long as you follow certain rules, then you will be protected individually.
But you can be an S Corp, not be an LLC. That's what
No, an S corp doesn't exist as a legal entity.
Right, understood. It's really for taxation.
Yeah. It's just a conversation I have with a lot of CPAs about why we're setting up as an LLC and why their clients can still be taxed as S corps even if we set them up as an LLC.
Right, so then theoretically, legally, I mean, corporation exists as a legal entity.
Yeah.
So then, if I'm an S corp, I'm really, as far as legally concerned, I'm a corporation, like a regular C corp. Except that I have the sub-designation of being an S corp.
A corporation will either be taxed as a C corp or an S corp.
Right.
Okay.
That's a taxation purpose.
Yeah.
Legally,
A corporation's a corporation. Shareholders still retain a lot of protections that limited liability members hold.
and should they pierce that a lot when it's an S corp because it's smaller, that they should pierce that corporate veil, if you will?
Yeah, well,
for
the
people.
corporate veil, right. It's not really the size of the company which will affect that. It's if you followed the proper procedures for having a separate bank account for the company, separate bookkeeping, separate checks. You're running things through your corporation legally. You're not just buying things with a corporation so that you can not pay someone back and then say, oh, that was my corporation, not me. Jeremy?
Isn't the big decision between an S corp or an LLC tax-based? Like, either way, you're getting the legal protection you need, and it depends how you're going to file your taxes and what you're...
That's the intricacy that I'm trying to explain. There's not an LLC versus an S corp. There's a legal entity, which is an LLC, a partnership, or a corporation. When it's time to be taxed, the IRS will tax you as a C corp or an S corp.
Exactly. So you're
Totally separate.
multiple LLCs and roll it all up into one.
Yeah,
Tax purposes.
exactly. You can still be.
Is the LLC different than a corporation legally?
Yeah, a lot of different terms, a lot of different rights within the Florida statute. So an LLC has members and
Wouldn't it be a disregarded entity for tax purposes, an LLC?
as if you're taxed as an S corp, yeah. So
Only for
yeah, so
individual owned an LLC, it would be disregarded.
it's still disregarded, yeah. Corporations usually have to have a board of directors, and then you can have your officers, and you have a lot more corporate reporting requirements. LLCs, you have members, and you don't have the requirements. You can opt out of a lot of the Florida statutes, which require more reporting, if that makes sense. So if it's you and just a few people, I almost always recommend an LLC as opposed to a corporation. When you're a corporation, the internal governing document you need to have is a shareholders agreement. You can have different classes of shares. Some shareholders have voting rights and some don't. And then, sometimes officers are also shareholders and sometimes they're not. Your board of directors, same thing. With an LLC, if you're a member, you own part of the LLC, and then you can appoint a manager. Just one person is the manager that has all the rights to run the company. It's a much easier way, and it's easier for reporting and really for running your operation. Joe, you had a question?
Yeah, I thought that, and it's been a long time since I looked at it, but I thought that the S corp and a LLC are taxed the same way as the flow-through entities, the same way partnerships taxed. So what is the real difference between taxation as an S corp versus an LLC?
What you said is correct. Okay. The discussion is people say, oh, I'm an S corp. That's not a legal entity. You may be taxed that way. You just need to know that you're either a corporation or an LLC or a partnership. So the difference is it's an S corp has nothing to do when we go to court or someone sued, it's not going to say Deshepola and Partners, S corp. You're either going to be a corporation or an LLC or a professional limited liability company. Completely separate than legal is how you're taxed as either an S corp or a sole proprietor.
Because you were saying before that I thought you were saying that LLC would elect S corp designation for tax return purposes.
Yep.
Why would they do that? I thought it's a pass-through, just as a partnership or...
Right, because as you grow and you get multiple members of an LLC, you're not a sole proprietor, so your CPA will change your tax designation, and it's just easier to designate as an S corp, and it saves a lot of paperwork for your CPA. So really, when I said there's CPAs in the room, these are the questions we have to deal with your CPA, or else you're going to have a lot more tax requirements if they don't designate you properly. Yes, Frank.
I have a question. What's the difference if a foreign shareholder is in the company? Can I choose the same way as there are only American ones, or are any limitations?
If you're a foreign investor into an American company
Shareholder.
and you're a shareholder, that won't affect the corporation as long as you're not a C corp, because again, it's just flow through taxes, so you'll have to deal with that individually as a shareholder. The business will not have to deal with that.
Mm-hmm. So what would be the best choice? You said, as I understood, C corp would be a good tax choice.
No.
No?
Yeah, you're going to want to be an S corp.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what is C and S standing for? C corp and S corp?
It's a subchapter S in the IRS code.
Sub?
Yeah. It's basically it's just a chapter designation.
Okay. So
I just want to clarify. I'm not an accountant.
I know.
I'm not an immigration attorney. Yeah, I just gave you. In fact, let's start over. All right. No tax advice. These are the conversations that I have with your CPA. So, but I do like to clarify that because that's a very common question people get. Hey, I want to. You guys do business law? Yeah. Okay. Well, I need to be an S corp. So we got to go through the whole thing. So,
Thanks.
did you have a question? No? Okay. Let me move on to some business basics. Some of these are very common sense tips, but I like to go through them anyway. Keep good records. You don't have to raise your hand, but if you've ever had an employee with a wage and hour claim against you and you don't have your record saying, here's when he checked in every day, here's when he checked out, here are all the days he missed, here's why he was disciplined, if you've ever had a retaliation claim, and you have everything logged, you have a much better chance of not getting hit with a huge fine and penalty, because employees, when they go after you for those things, that's federal matters, and they're very expensive, and you will also get hit with having to repay their attorney's fees. So even if you owe them $10, you're going to get hit with about $20,000 in attorney's fees. So always keep very good records, especially when you have employees. Proper insurance. Seen a lot of clients say, yeah, I have business insurance. Okay, what does it cover? And they can't tell you what's covered. Anyone ever been a victim of identity theft? Me, several times. We now have cyber crime liability insurance. It was about $1,000 per year, at least for my firm. So if anyone is able, even though we have protections in place, is able to get into our system and steal information, and that were to somehow damage one of our clients, we're covered through our insurance.
And how are you covered?
How are we covered?
Which amount or whatever?
Like $1 million? Yeah, it really wasn't that well. Will, you can probably answer those questions. Will does commercial insurance and stuff, so.
I mean, it depends what your policy is, but a typical limit would be $1 million liability limit
Yeah,
on the cyber liability.
and that's a new area that's really,
Yeah.
we'll
Scott Insurance Companies, all confused.
yeah, definitely. So, but that's a reality. I mean, Target, you've seen some of the bigger ones, but smaller businesses are affected as well.
And can be affected more as well, because they tend to have everything on their computers, and they have very few computers that don't have higher levels of security. And
Exactly.
It's easier to get hacked or messed up, and then things happen and evolve quickly, and your
Yep.
clients are having issues because of the information maybe that was taken and or copied from your system. So I think the smaller clients are much bigger target.
They're more vulnerable. They're not really a bigger target, but they're definitely more vulnerable. If you do have, if you take Social Security numbers, a lot of attorneys have to for certain filings, or you take credit card information, either don't store it or encrypt it when you do store it. But yeah, again, I'm not an expert in cyber liability, but as a business owner, my advice to you is make sure you have the insurance. Employee handbooks are also an area that seems very daunting for small businesses. Our employee handbook is 50 pages. Like, who has time to sit down, or where do you go to have an employee handbook, but there are online resources. We have a partnership with an online company that you do a few clicks and they generate one for you with the table of contents. So those resources are out there, but you cover things like having an anti-discrimination policy. It's in writing. You're able to show, hey, this is our company policy. We gave it to our employee on this date. They signed for it here. And it can cover other things, dress codes, paid time off, all the things that, again, seem like, where do I go to get those answers as a small business owner? That's tough. Employees versus independent contractors. This is a fun one. The main difference between an employee and an independent contractor is control. If someone is required to go to your office from 9 to 5 and they have to follow your systems, your processes, your procedures, they're an employee. So you can try to pay them as an independent contractor and not pay taxes. And if you never get caught, congratulations. I know a lot of people do that when they start businesses and they just don't have the revenue to really care to, but as you grow, you're going to want to make sure that you have that in place. You can't say, well, look at my contract. It says independent contractor. It doesn't matter what it says on the contract, okay? If you do want to keep people as an independent contractor, then here's the project, here's some guidelines, but your own hours, your own time, your own resources, okay? That's kind of the two extremes. I know a lot of time it ends up in the middle, but
What about exemption, from overtime type of thing? I have employees, so.
yeah.
There was a discussion I had recently with one of my employees that decided that he wasn't exempt.
Okay.
And I went through the code and all that, and best as I could decipher, he was exempt, but under the way he defined it from one particular part of the code, he wasn't
I know.
exempt from overtime. So it was a discussion we had.
I'm going to give you the answer that lawyers give a lot, that people shake their head. It depends. In addition, there are, the code is so big, and I'm not an employment defense lawyer, if that makes sense, okay? I have an intellectual property and attorney in the room, she's laughing, personal injury attorneys in the room. When I get questions on IP law, right, on personal injury, I give a very, look, I'm good at what I do because I stay very narrow. I'm going to work on your contracts and, the business needs, but I don't know the employment code. But I'll give you an answer anyway, okay? If you have a salaried employee and they make more than they would hourly, and you require them to work a little extra, you're normally covered. But if you try putting someone on salary for $20,000 a year and you're requiring them to work 80 hours per week, and I know businesses that are doing this, so it happens. So people kind of shake their head, but it happens. Well, what do you mean overtime? You're a salaried employee. Well, when you break down the hours, they would be under minimum wage. That company's getting nailed big time. That's the yeah. I know there are a lot of other exemptions. There's a lot of stuff in there. So different seminar, requiring a lot more time. Yeah, that's next month. Jeremy, you got that down for next seminar, right? Yeah, employment law. Okay, contract elements. I just picked two. I mentioned attorney's fees earlier. A lot of times in litigation, the attorneys win and the clients end up not in as good a position as they want. We've got one of our other attorneys at a mediation today, and we told the clients, look, whenever you settle, both sides feel like they gave up a little more than they wanted to, unfortunately, okay? If you go all the way to trial, then yes, you can win, but that's also very expensive. So in order to deter people from suing you, when you do have contracts with outside vendors, clients, etc., you want a provision in there, even if it's short and sweet. You want it to cover venue, meaning if there's a lawsuit over the relationship, not just the contract, but the relationship, it has to take place where you are and in the county where you are. Because imagine trying to defend a lawsuit in another state because you did business with someone out of state. Talk about pricey. And you want it to say that the prevailing party gets attorney's fees. So if you sue me, when I win, you're not only going to not get anything out of me, you're going to have to pay for all my attorneys who are going to when they report their hours, they're going to give you their top rate. Trust me. So, Mark?
So I know you're not here to just plug the fact that every business should have a business attorney, even though they probably should, but if you're gonna write your own contracts, which I know you probably wouldn't recommend in general, but you gotta be real careful putting a provision like this in, right? Because if you're writing your own contract and putting this provision in there, what you're basically saying is, I might be doubling up what I have to pay when somebody sues me because I wrote this crappy contract. It's not, so I know you don't want to promote, needing a business attorney too much, but wouldn't you agree that, you really should be writing your own contracts, and even if you start putting clauses like this in here, couldn't you theoretically just be setting yourself up for a more negative situation? Does that make sense? I'm not saying leave this out, but you really shouldn't. I don't know. You got to get that?
Yes, I do. First of all, I would give the same answer as if someone said, well, I'll just build my own website, which you would tell them, not a good idea, right? All attorney's fees clauses are reciprocal. So if you put one in your contract that says, if you sue me and I win, I get attorney's fees, courts automatically, too bad, that's an attorney's fees provision, it applies to both parties. So if you lose,
Your own contract.
right, you're going to have to pay attorney's fees. So if it's in there, it's a deterrent. It's also a deterrent from you and a lot of my clients from saying, oh, I don't care, let him sue, or let's sue the crap out of them. Okay, let's take the anger out of it and let's talk this through, because if you lose, you're going to be really mad at me and you're also going to have to pay their attorney's fees. And it really makes both parties think long and hard before they get into a lawsuit, okay? We do business litigation. It is still my pitch to people, if I can keep you out of the courtroom, you're going to like me a lot better. It's long, it's frustrating, it's expensive. That's just a fact, okay? But that's a good question. A termination and damages clause, this will answer your question even better, Mark. That one really should be drafted by an attorney, because if you, I had a big real estate litigation case over a contract, hundreds of thousands of dollars on the line, and it came down to a comma with a few words after, such as, we can terminate this contract, comma, with 5 days notice. Even though it only was 5 days notice, that was enough consideration to have the court uphold the contract. Because if you have a contract with someone, you say, I can cancel it at any time, well, then what good's that contract? Because they could walk in one day in the middle of business and kick you out saying, I'm canceling your lease, you're out of here, okay? Very important, if you want to give yourself flexibility, that you either give yourself an out, or that, if you're, for example, a landlord and you have tenants, that you say, okay, I may need this space because we've got things coming up. I'm going to put a provision here saying I can either relocate you or I can terminate this contract with 90 days notice, which is plenty of time to go find a new spot. But if you're negotiating on the other side of that, that's something you want reviewed by an attorney so you don't get yourself into a jam, which I've seen that happen pretty often. So any general questions, contract questions? Anything else?
How do you feel about mediation clauses?
Mediation clauses. So a lot of times in contracts it'll say before filing a lawsuit you must do mediation, okay? I feel like I wish parties would follow the mediation clauses that are in there. This has happened to us 3 times this summer. We've sent a mediation demand. It's been ignored, so we had to, you all right, Mark? We had to file suit only to have the court say you have to mediate. But we had to file suit to mandate a response. So, but the court will generally make you mediate, and to mediate early is better than to not mediate at all. If you can reach a resolution, within a few months instead of a few years, then I think they can be very valuable. That's a good question, though. Okay.
And it also applies to me, obviously applies to be concerned about as well, the mediation rules. When mediated, in other words, when the agreement agrees is written, you want it to be mediated by whatever would make the most sense or be the most fair, as opposed to just, it has to be mediated by Brett.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah.
Work, and now Brett and I are not friends, and he's not going to want to help me.
Yeah, generally you don't include someone's name, but you can include a cap. Some mediators in downtown Miami, they're charging $750 per hour. There are really good mediators who are charging $250 per hour. They just have a different business model, and you know. So yeah, I would rather have, depending on the amount in dispute, if it's millions and millions, my clients don't care how much they're spending on a mediator, right? If it's 30, 40, 100 grand, then yeah, let's go this route. And if it's in the contract, it'll protect you from that. Okay, it's already 1 o'clock, so I'm just going to shoot down the bullet point list of what should be in an operating agreement. We started with operating agreements. Remember, if you're an LLC and you have more than one owner, please have an operating agreement. If it's just you anyway. If you're a corporation, it's called a shareholders agreement, okay? So either way, in both agreements, it needs to outline the structure of your business, including the duties of the shareholders, if any, or the members of an LLC, the percentage that each business owner has. A lot of times it's 50-50, a lot of times it's not. If you're putting capital into the business early on, you need to designate that money as either a capital contribution or a loan. If you don't designate it as a loan and you think, oh yeah, I loaned my brother's friend's company 30 grand, they could say, no, that was a capital contribution. We don't owe it back to you. Then what happens? You've got to take whatever percentage of the company they're giving you instead of being able to get that loan money back. Again, specify when dividends or distributions are paid and how, who's in charge, the powers and duties of each of the shareholders, if any. Buyout methods. This one, I know a lot of different businesses deal with this, but you go into business with one other person and that person kicks the bucket or gets in an accident and they're unable to participate, their next of kin could be your new business partner. So I think I put in here, you know, you don't want to be business partners with Uncle Rico, going back to Napoleon Dynamite. So that's it. I'm sure people have to leave at 1. If anyone else wants to stick around and ask questions, Lawrence, I think you were going to wrap up a little bit, but I don't know how much time we have for questions.
Guys, can we give a hand to Brett?